If you have this nagging feeling that your scores should be lower, it's likely that your playing skills are deficient. This could be because of your decision making, your attitude, your process, or a whole host of other issues. Learning to score is a skill that's actually independent of your ball striking at times. And one of my goals on this channel is to build up a library of valuable material that'll make you more efficient on the golf course. And as it grows, what I'm going to try and do is bring in other coaches who I respect. So in this video, I'm going to share a presentation from Scott Fawcett. If you read my book or listened to my podcast, The Sweet Spot, you've likely heard of Scott and his decade system. A few months ago, we recorded this webinar where Scott walks through some of the basics of decade and gives a ton of valuable information on decision making and how scoring really occurs. I'm pretty careful with which products I recommend to golfers because, quite frankly, there's a lot of junk out there that won't help you. But I'd be shocked if a golfer who learned Decade Elite or Decade Foundations, which is geared towards the more average player, that they wouldn't figure out how to lower their handicap with this information. So I'm going to add a coupon code in the description if you're interested in Decade. But whether you sign up or not, you should watch this presentation, which I'm going to switch to now. All right, you want to kick it off, buddy?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, first and foremost, I mean, thank you. None of this is lost on me. I do think it's funny to be able to have 200 people chime in from. I just saw Austria and Myrtle Beach and Australia and Sweden, and it's pretty crazy. Because what I will say is that while I did do a lot of work creating Decade, and I'll start sharing my screen. And John, if I ever seem like I'm off from what I'm saying, just say, hey, you didn't advance or something.
Okay.
I played professionally. I played golf at Texas A&M, played professionally for 6 years, and started an electricity company, blah, 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 blah. I won't worry about all that stuff. But I met Chris Como, actually, Tiger's old instructor, and Bryson's, and Jason Day, and Xander Schauffele, and everyone. I met him actually playing in an illegal underground poker game in Dallas back in 2005. And we were actually friends for about a year before we finally realized we're both in the golf business. And that's really, I won't say where my analytical brain started forming for golf, but it really is, even though I've got degrees in finance and economics and used to think I was good at math until I met kids from MIT and realized I am not good at math. I started thinking of golf as a poker game at that point. And what I mean by poker game is we all just understand that poker is a math game, chess is a math game, backgammon is a math game. But if you really break it down into its parts, golf actually is too. And it's funny, I bet in some form or fashion, all games are technically a math game to some extent, because a joke that I say all the time is that every decision, people say, like, I don't like math and I'm just a field player. Every decision you make in life is in some form or fashion math based. And my little joke for that is, if you're thinking about crossing the road and it's not 100%, you're probably going to wait until the light turns green or there's a little bit better break in the traffic or something like that. However, if you've got a pack of lions that are chasing you, and if you can make it to the other side of the road, you may drop your needs from less than 100%, because getting hit by a car anyways would be better than getting eaten by lions. And so whether you realize or not, you're doing just weighted expectation math. And that's essentially all that Decade is. So back when they started releasing the strokes gain statistics in 2010-ish, I believe, personally, as a player, I quickly realized that, wow, if we know how many strokes it takes to hole out from any given area on the golf course, we're going to be able to figure out with TrackMan shot pattern sizes, like what optimal strategy is. And if anything, strategy is kind of like the most mystical, elusive, cliche-ridden part of the game, simply because people would say, like, well, here's what you want to do in this situation. It's like, based on what? Even if Jack Nicklaus were telling you something, it would be like, Jack, based on what? Because one thing that he used to always say is, I'm going to start it at the middle of the green and I'm going to fade it, and I'm just never going to let it cross the flag. And I can guarantee you that's not actually what happened. And so really, again, just removing a lot of the mystery of the game. And like I say, I won't go too far into this, but the country club that I was at that I joined back in 2003 was where Zalatoris, when his family moved from San Francisco to Dallas, it's where they joined. So I actually knew him when I was a member of the Corn Ferry Tour in 2009 and 10, and knew him when he was just the little 9 and 10-year-old kid farting around at the golf course, trying to tag around with me as much as possible. And 2013-14 was when they released all of the strokes gain statistics. And I just realized that I could write a little bit of Excel code, which sounds a lot fancier than it is. Again, it's just basic weighted average math, and solve course management. the 2 weeks before the Texas Amateur in 2014, I got a cortisone shot in my right elbow, and the doctor actually paralyzed my right arm, which is the only reason I called Will and said, let me caddy for you at the Texas Am in 2 weeks. Obviously, my arm came back to life. Don't worry about that. But let me caddy for you. The doctor said I need to take a couple months off golf, let all the inflammation and whatever go away. And at the time, he was ranked 3,300 in the world, had never won more than a high school golf tournament. You've probably heard this story enough, so don't worry, I'm not going to belabor the point. But he won the tournament by 4. And to be perfectly honest, as we were out there playing, at the time, he had literally never beaten me in a single round of golf. And obviously, that would imply that I would have won the Texas Amateur by at least 8 or 4 over him, which would not have been the case again, obviously. And the one thing that I say is, yes, Decade is about math and strategy and everything else, but it's really about the mindset that is required to play your best golf. So when I was playing professionally in my 20s, I was essentially a lunatic. Zero expectation management, no realistic expectations, total hothead. And one thing that I'll say right out of the blocks there is, if that's you, you really need to dig into your own thoughts and feelings and realize you're probably doing this to display to everybody else, I'm better than this. Most people, when they're getting mad, they're not actually that mad. They're just letting everyone, it's a show. They're letting everyone else know that I'm better than this. Um, Again, long story long, I caddied for Will when he won the US Junior. Sophia Popov, the qualifier that won the British Open a couple of years ago. Again, I've worked with 60 tour players. I'm not going to bother naming all the names, but I just want to kind of illustrate that this works for men, women, it works for amateurs. It really is pretty universal. Deschambeau would be the second person that I worked with directly. And one of the things I like showing about this is this sign that he flagged for me, this flag that he signed for me at the US Amateur that he won. Lots of people see this over here and they're like, did he sign the wrong side of the flag? And I'm like, no.
That's why you said it backwards, because he signed it
Yeah.
backwards.
He actually signed this left-handed and backwards. So he wrote this left-handed going the wrong direction. And when you hold a mirror up in front of it, it's his name the correct way, which again, I don't really know the point of that, but it's pretty damn impressive to watch somebody do. Again, won't waste much more time about this, but one thing that I want to show you here is this one success story. I get emails like this all the time, but this guy said, I've been stuck at a 5 to 7 handicap for years and truly felt that I should be shooting lower scores. Today I shot 200 and I'm down to a 0.6, which I get emails like this more than you could possibly imagine. And what we did is something fun is we take our average elite user, or just average member basically, and we take their first 3 rounds entered in their stats in the stats portal, and we use that as like their benchmark of comparison. We don't worry about handicaps or anything like that. We're just talking about improvement in scoring average. We then average every round 120 days after they entered, so where they've been a member for 4 months. And members who averaged over 78, so someone shooting in their 80s, they improved by 34% in relation to 72. Like, if you feel like you should be shooting lower scores every time you play, which every single one of you most likely does, there's only one of two things that are possible. You're either not as good as you think you are, or you made mental and strategic mistakes, and it's likely a combination of both, to be perfectly honest. But this game really is about eliminating these silly little pedantic mistakes. I like busting through this really quick just because you're going to hear about strokes gained for the foreseeable future in golf. There's a couple of adjustments they may or may not make, but strokes gained is very simple. It sounds scary because some people are scared of math, but essentially an 8-foot putt on the PGA Tour has a 50% make rate. Well, something that has a 50% make rate also then means that its expectation to hole out is 1.5 strokes. Again, you cannot hit the ball 1.5 times. And what we're trying to really drill down here to is we're going to start thinking of fractions of shots instead of the length of the shot remaining. So if my expectation to hole out is 1.5 strokes and I make that putt, I, in essence, beat my expectation by 0.5 shots. That's why I gain 0.5 shots against my expectation. If I happen to 2-putt it, same thing. I've lost 0.5 shots against my expected value. So if in 2 holes I have 2 8-foot putts and I make one and I miss one, well, I've used 3 putts in 2 holes. 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. Bam, I am 0 strokes gained. And a lot of the first thing that people start to think is, well, but not all 8-foot putts are the same. A side hill slider is easier or harder than an uphill right lip putt. And yes, that's true. But first and foremost, it's not nearly as much as you would expect. I mean, and it's shockingly similar, to be perfectly honest. So
It's within a few percentage points, right?
it's
I
within a few
remember,
percentage
yeah,
points. I mean,
yeah.
it's just crazy. I mean, it really is crazy. And a 5-foot putt coming across a 3% slope versus an uphill 7-foot putt with less than 1% of slope, the make rate's like 16% better. I mean, again, it's just astronomical how getting the ball as close to the hole as you possibly can, rather than trying to, well, I want to chip it to have a right to left putt, or I want to lag it to this side of the hole for an uphiller, or geez, why didn't Rory leave it 4 feet below the hole instead of 4 feet above the
Because
hole
he just should
on
have
the
run up there
72nd
and
hole?
placed it there.
What's
Yeah,
that?
he should have just run up there and placed it there where he wanted it, right?
Exactly. And so what we're going to be thinking about is range of outcomes instead of I'd rather be here than there. A lot of people, the main mathematical mistake people make is they think, well, I'd rather be chipping from here than putting from there. And while that may be true in isolation, you have to think of the entire shot pattern again in order to drill down on our best expected value. Taking this idea one step further, though, 100 yards in the fairway on the PGA Tour. I would ask you to take your guesses, but we're not going to let a couple hundred people all guess at the same time. The average strokes to hole out from 100 yards in the fairway on the PGA Tour is 2.8 shots, which first and foremost is way higher than the vast majority of people would possibly expect. So if we are 100 yards in the fairway, rather than thinking we're 100 yards in the fairway, I want to think I'm 2.8 shots to hole out. And again, this is just mental stuff here. Don't actually worry about remembering these numbers. I'm just trying to show you a little bit of insight on how to flip the script into your favor for expectations. So I'm 2.8. If I happen to hit it to 8 feet, I've moved it from 2.8 to 1.5. I've moved the ball 1.3 strokes closer to the hole. In one stroke, I in essence gained 0.3 shots. Now, if you want to talk about how hard putting is, if I made an 8-foot putt, I gained 0.5 shots against my expectation. If I hit it to 8 feet from 100 yards in the fairway, which feels like a pretty damn good shot, I only gained 0.3 shots. Literally hitting it and making an 8-foot putt is nearly twice as valuable as hitting it to 8 feet from 100 yards in the fairway, gaining 0.5 versus 0.3. And it's like, trust me, when the first times I did this portion of the presentation, I swear to God, inside of me, I was like, am I saying this right? Because even though I know this, it
Yeah.
feels absolutely insane.
Putting is really hard.
Putting is really hard. It's really, really, really hard. Every inch from 3 feet to 8 feet is 1% in your make rate. Again, all these numbers we're talking about are PGA Tour numbers, but trust me, they all pretty much apply to everyone, regardless of how good or bad you are. It's a pretty smooth ratio as you get worse at golf. Your scoring average goes up. How these numbers impact you essentially the same way that they do a tour player. So first and foremost is just nothing short of expectation management. Again, first and foremost, I'm a utopian guy on this. I would prefer you not even know what you are in relation to par, in relation to the cut line, in relation to the leaderboard. Just go hit shots and see what happens at the end. I really do believe that also.
Well, I think one thing, if I could bring it up quickly, is on the like putting make rates. People often ask, well, if I know from 5 feet the putting make rate is only 50% for a 90 shooter, like that's kind of like a defeatist thing. And I don't look at these numbers like I don't play golf. I'm on the putting green thinking, well, oh, I have a 30% chance of making that. I think these numbers are more helpful with like your reactions and the analysis after the fact. It's not that we want you going up there saying, as Scott said, like, oh, I'm going to hole out 0.3 times from here. The math is insignificant in the moment. It's more so developing the mindset and the expectation management so that when you do hit it to 20 feet from 100 yards in the fairway, you're like, oh, that was a really good shot. Or if you
I
miss the
do
eight
agree with
footer,
that, but
yeah,
having a few of these basic numbers memorized, 165 yards in the fairways where they average 3 strokes to hole out. Every single shot back in 2014 specifically was Zalatoris at the Texas Am, US Junior, and US Amateur. I told him what his expected value was on every single shot just to keep his brain in check. Like when he missed a 4-foot putt. I mean, on tour, that's only 88%. Like you're going to miss those.
yeah.
Let's tap it in and move on. Again, it was pure luck that it worked, but I felt like it would relieve some of the pressure he feels to be perfect because you're just not going to play perfect golf. One of the main things that I used to get, not as much anymore since now they have all agreed with me finally, but I used to catch on social media is that, everything I teach is common sense. And in this video, I'm not going to bother playing it, but this is from that same video when Curtis Strange was interviewing Tiger before his first start. And he asked him, like, what have you learned out here on tour? And he said, last year I was playing with Nick Price in the US Open. And after we finished, Nick shot like 65 or something like that and was leading. And I asked him after the round, like, how many pins did you fire at? And Nick said like two. And he's like, wow. And the next day he came out and did the same thing. And he's like, I didn't actually fire at any today. And Tiger's like, man, I was firing at every single one that I felt comfortable with, which was basically all of them. And so understanding that you do need to put effort into this. Again, this is where I start feeling super salesy sometimes. But again, if you feel like you should have shot lower and you didn't every single time you play, what's your plan for alleviating that feeling? I know that, again, when I was playing professionally in my 20s, looking back at it, I've definitely wondered this because I like to fancy myself a smart guy, but some of the stuff I did was so dumb, it's incredible. But my buddies and I would go to Chili's or the Outback every single night after every single round, and we'd talk about just all the dumb stuff we did. Now, it never dawned on me, how can I stop doing that in the future? Because I think in hindsight, I thought that I needed to just get physically better at the game. There wasn't anything necessarily strategic or decision wise that I could have done to get better. I just felt like I need to just get better. And understanding that decision making is probably the leading way that you can get better at this game, especially in short order. Now, my old roommate actually is Tiger's caddy right now, Lance Bennett. And he had told me a number of years ago, actually, that Tiger had these 5 things that he tracked while he was out there playing. You may have seen on social media, Smiley Kaufman recently brought all these things up that got a bit of circulation. He was like, some tour player, I can't remember who. And I'm like, it wasn't a tour player, Smiley. It was me. And it was at TPC San Antonio about 7 years ago. But these things are what Tiger used to track while he was out playing golf. And it was how many doubles, how many bogeys on par fives, how many three putts, how many bogeys. He technically tracked with bogey with 9 iron or less. I don't know what club he was hitting. So for ShotLink, I had to just turn it into bogeys inside 150. And then Tiger actually tracked blown easy saves, which again is subjective. So we just tracked 2 chips for the Decade app. And what the data here shows is the guys that missed the cut on the PGA Tour average 0.56 bogeys, double bogeys per round, rather. The guys finishing first to fifth average 0.14. Well, obviously, that's a scoring statistic. Shocker, the guys that are doing well make fewer doubles than the guys that are missing the cuts. Bogeys on par five, same thing. They're doing significantly better. Three putts, they're doing significantly better. But again, all of these are scoring statistics, so it's quite obvious that they're doing better in these categories. But this is the one that blows my mind because even though I understand that if you are watching TV, they act like every single hole they've got sand wedge into, the average approach shot on the PGA Tour is still 170-ish yards. And so when you look at this, they actually only have about 10, maybe 11 opportunities per round inside 150 yards, sometimes not even that many, to be perfectly honest. And the guys missing the cut make an average of 2.1 bogeys per round inside 150 yards. But this is the one that blows my mind. And again, the reason I use first to fifth instead of just the winner is I wanted to say this is indicative of a very good finish on tour, not, hey, DJ or Scotty won by 9 and the stats get distorted. So I wanted to take just the top 5. Even the guys that are finishing the top 5 average nearly a full bogey per round inside of 150 yards. And you cannot make enough birdies to offset making that many bogeys. If you look at the sum of the first 3 categories, it's less than 1 stroke, and the bogeys inside 150 on its own are 1.13. I mean, this is just the killer. And again, this is all relative to your ability. Maybe this is bogeys inside 100 for you. For college women, for my LPGA players, I turn this into bogeys inside 130. We're just trying to get a theme going of how many pedantic shots we all waste at the end of the day. Because even the great Tiger Woods, if you look at his throughout his years, 96, I highlight the post car wreck years as kind of being, man, I don't even want to try to get into analyze what all's going on here. Post or first car wreck, I should say, post scandal. But if you look, yeah, they're all kind of, he does a little bit better on bogeys on par fives and a little bit better on doubles, a little bit better on three putts. But if you look at these bogeys per round inside 150, it just drops off in the middle of the 99 season, which was when he won. It was either 7 of his last 8 starts or 8 of his last 9, something ridiculous. It literally just fell off like a cliff in the middle of that season. And bam, I mean, he literally over the course of the late 90s through the early 2000s, he got over a full shot better just by not making bogey inside of 150 yards. Now, sure, he could have gotten materially better overnight, I guess. I do believe, I have no idea if this is true or not, I do believe he changed something strategically in his brain and thought, I sure do feel like I make a lot of stupid bogeys. Let's just try to play a tournament and not do that and see what happens. And again, I'm just hypothesizing here, but I think he did well. And I think he's probably like, let's see what happens next week. And then just like, essentially, I would say figured out the cheat code to golf is far more about avoiding the silly bogeys than it is making the great birdies. The great birdies come more from variance. Again, the better you are, the less variance you need. But regardless, the best players still have to get somewhat lucky, make a mid-length putt, have a shot that just, especially on tour, where you're using pin sheets in front of the green sprinkler heads, because your yardage is approximately correct. I mean, all birdies have some function of luck in them. I mean, literally, period. And I just think that's something you need to understand, because I'm always trying to give you actionable advice. Actionable advice is not, hey, let's go make birdies. Actionable advice is, hey, let's stop making the dumb bogeys. And it takes a lot of patience and discipline, which I do believe is one of basically Tiger's superpowers. I'm going to skip ahead on this and come back to it if we have time. Because what I really want you to see is, I just took, this is something I made for college golfers. So I pretended our scoring average is in the 60s. This is all just from the Decade app. As your scoring average drops every 3 shots through the 70s, yes, you're making more birdies, but the vast majority of your improvement is by making fewer bogeys. So that first jump from 79 to 76, over 80% of it is from avoiding bogeys. And we're talking about good players here. This isn't a handicap. This is your scoring average. So these are really probably pretty much right around scratch, maybe 2 handicap type players. And then, yes, as our scoring average keeps getting lower, like by definition, we are going to need to start making more birdies, simply because you can't shoot 5 and 6 under without making birdies. But the vast majority of our improvement, literally at a 2-to-1 clip, is still by avoiding bogey and higher. And again, this number just holds true all the way to the PGA Tour. Because again, I think that some of these numbers are obvious if you would actually sit down and think about it. But as your scoring average improves from 95 to 79, only one of those 16 shots is from making more birdies. The other 15 shots are from bogey and higher avoidance. And again, if you sit down and you think about, man, I should have shot lower today. If it's not one of these 5 things, you're kidding yourself. And importantly, it's not no double bogeys. It's not too many double bogeys. I just played in the US Senior Open back in June. I shot 75, and I did it with absolutely no game. I'm not going to sit here and say that this is amazing, but I am, at the end of the day, a 51-year-old amateur who plays golf about 25 times a year. And I just went out there I mean, again, I can't describe to you how bad I was hitting it and putting and everything. I mean, just smoke and mirrors to get 75 on the board. But I understood starting the round, like, I'm going to make bogeys. I'm going to probably make a double. The key is to not let that impact my decision making moving forward and turn that 75 into a 78. I really, that was critical to my, at a minimum, not embarrassing myself in this golf tournament, because this is stunning to me. This is Aaron Wise, NCAA champion. When he hit these 20 shots for me on the range at TPC Summerlin, he was the reigning PGA Tour Rookie of the Year. He had just won the Byron Nelson a few months earlier. And I just asked him, hey, just hit 27 irons out there for me. It was blowing about 15 miles an hour off the left this day, but I said, I just want you to hit them towards this target. I don't really care where the ball goes. I'm going to normalize them to no conditions, no wind. And so I do believe this was like the second or third shot he hit, 22 yards left with a 7-iron. I do think he was having a little bit of difficulty with that, but at the end of the day, he did settle in, and this is a pretty standard shot pattern. He said it was going to go about 188 yards, was a 7-iron at the time. And this shot pattern is 28 yards wide with a 7-iron. This is why trying to hit your fairway finder shot, or in certain drivable par fours, be like, I'm just going to get this, 4-iron out there in the fairway and have a nice wedge in. You literally could not hit the fairway every single time with a 7-iron. So this is why being super aggressive off the tee is by far the most important thing you can possibly do. But if you think about this, this is where he was trying to hit it. He basically threw a donut over his actual target. Again, I hope he's not one of the couple hundred people sitting in here right now. But Aaron, if you are, you're a great player. You've made millions of dollars. Congratulations. But at the end of the day, if he weren't aiming at the target, at the flag, he would have been more successful in this series of 20 shots. Now, obviously, if he hit a million shots, this would all fill in much more. But this is why, again, understanding and trusting variance within your shot pattern is what's going to produce the great shots. And our normal shots, we're just trying to avoid massive mistakes. One thing I need you to be able to do if you do wind up getting the Decade app and learning the course management that I teach, this target. So when you go through the math and you find out your Decade target relative to the hole location, I need you to be able to center your shot pattern over the Decade target. So the pin might be 4 yards left or right of it, but you need to be able to center your shot pattern over the target, which he basically did. He basically had half his shots left and half his shots right. Um, but most people are kind of stunned when they think this is Aaron Wise again from 190 with a 28-yard wide shot pattern. And then once I start introducing some shot link images, this right here is actually a par 3. It's number 15 at Innisbrook from a couple years ago on the PGA Tour. And this shot pattern, technically, if I took all the shots, it's over 50 yards wide and 50 yards deep from 200 yards with about a 7 to 10 mile an hour wind off the left this day that they had it. Again, this is why I talk about we have a shotgun, not a sniper rifle. It doesn't matter where on the green this hole would be located. There would be somebody that accidentally hit it close. Now, obviously, these guys are really good at golf, but if I took all of these shots and shifted them a little bit further right, these shots that are dead left would now be these shots that are not dead. These shots that are close would obviously now be over here putting for par, but these shots that are in the bunker would now be the ones that are close. And all of these would now just be barely off the green, which is a much easier up and down than this. This is where, again, we're starting to look at fractional shots we're saving and losing just
Have
by
you
adjusting
ever
this.
have you ever looked at that? Sorry to interrupt. It'd be
You're
funny
good.
because I'm assuming, in the 4 rounds of the tournament, you'd have four very different pin positions towards each edge. And have you ever done like a time lapse thing where you shifted the shot distribution based on the pin location
Oh
just to
yeah, I mean
see how it moved around, but was still quite wide around it?
it's just literally incredible. I mean, I'll come forward and come back to this because what you're talking about here is basically this idea. In my packets I send out to PGA Tour players every week, this is number 13 at Riviera. I always talk about y'all suck to front hole locations because these guys are trying to land it right here on the front edge because they're trying to make birdie. They're trying to hit it close. If I took all of these shots and shifted them 5 yards further into the green, again, yes, it would suck for these guys because now they would be 15 feet, but look how many more people hit it here. And it's because even on tour, we're all playing for this perfect shot every single time. If I'm out there 160 yards, it's a perfect 8-iron for me. But my average 8-iron is about 157. And this is where golf gets difficult because if I'm 157, excuse me, excuse me, if I'm 157, I need to just go ahead and hit a full 8-iron. And if I just happen to hit my 80th plus percentile shot, yeah, I'm going to be a few yards long. But I'm never accidentally hitting that club 165 or something like that. I'm talking about with no wind or conditions. But I'm going to hit it 155, 150, and even 145 a whole bunch. And just understanding that we've got this, again, shot pattern. But to what Jon was just saying, if I take this one and actually show the third round hole location, they also don't get any shots past it. Like it doesn't take a math degree to be able to realize if we took all these shots and shifted them further into the green, we would make a few more birdies because these shots would still be birdie looks from here. These shots would now be closer birdie looks, and probably some of these three putts and would go away. You just patience, discipline, understanding shot patterns. This is kind of that same point on the PGA Tour from 161 to 180 yards in the fairway to back hole locations. They hit the green 71% of the time, but to front hole locations, again, the exact same distance to front hole locations, that number drops to 57%. I mean, that's because this image right here is the exact same. I mean, so you can just see how many more greens in regulation they hit to this middle hole location. It would even be more exacerbated if the pin was in the back because some of these shots that are short would get on, and this would be even more exacerbated by having before the cut numbers in there. Again, thinking in fractional shots gain is just fractional shots is just the key to golf. Because again, Aaron's shot pattern here is basically 28-ish yards wide. This green that I was just illustrating to you right here The green, it's a huge green, 28 yards wide. I mean, that's a very big green, to be perfectly honest. It's not British Open big, but it's a big green. So if I now take this ellipse that contains 90% of Aaron's shots, and I lay these two ellipses are the exact same size, this shot pattern should basically be fitting for the most part inside of this ellipse. And where this gets interesting is the scoring average on this hole this day was 3.22. The average winner on the PGA Tour, I don't care if the winning score is 1 over par or 34 under par, the average winner is somewhere between 12 and 14 shots clear of the field average. So if the field average on this hole is 3.22, if I could simply hit this green and two putt it, I would be gaining 0.22 shots against the field. If we played this hole 72 times, I would be gaining 0.22 shots 72 times, which is 15.8 shots. This isn't perfect math. If you went to MIT, don't nitpick this thing to death. It's just trying to illustrate an idea here. But literally, for the most part, making a par on this hole is the equivalent golf of winning 100% of your starts on the PGA Tour. And it's like, again, just wrapping your head around, even if the winning score is 30 under, if you beat the field average on a hole, you're technically getting closer to that winning score, even if you make a par. And again, it's a tough thing to kind of wrap your head around. Again, I doubt I'm talking to a bunch of tour players here. Par is always good, especially from the trees, especially if you're putting from outside 20, maybe 25 feet. Par is just not a bad outcome virtually ever. Last thing I'll say about distance control here is this is now Aaron. That same day, I told him to hit a 110-yard sand wedge for me, and he did pretty good. He hit a whole bunch, 107, 8, and 9. But if I were caddying and every time for Aaron, and every time he was 110, I told him he was 112, he would be a materially better player. And again, this is because that idea that every inch from 3 to 8 feet is 1% in your make rate, even just moving this shot that was 6 or 7 feet short, moving it up to basically 2 feet, this is a huge gain in value. Taking this shot that's about 12 feet long and making it 20 feet longer, it doesn't really matter. Or not 20 feet longer, 20 feet long instead of 12. It matters, but it's not that big of a deal. But taking all of these guys right here and getting our distance control better. So what I need you to do, again, I'm prescribing actions that I hope are indicative that you want to play your best golf. To really figure out how far you hit each club, you need to be on a track, man. You need to be on the grass, not on mats, because spin rates change. You need to be hitting the ball that you actually play with, again, so spin rates don't change. And you need to hit 20, 30 shots with, 3 or 4 of your clubs. Hopefully they're spaced out correctly. And then you need to drop about the shortest 20% of shots and average the rest. And that's how far you carry the club. Not to come out and like badmouth a competitor like Arcos or some of the other companies, but at the end of the day, they're telling you, well, your average 7-iron goes X far. Well, how far did it carry? That's the more important idea. But also important to that is, did I hit it full? Did I hit it, 3/4? Into the wind hurts more than downwind helps. Sidewind's actually not that big of a deal, depending on if you're shaping it into the wind or riding the wind. You really need to be able to do the work to actually get out on the range and just figure out how far each club carries. Again, and then you need to learn the adjustments for what your totals will be. But even PGA Tour players, I mean, this is better than most of you would do, but they still aren't very good at it because, again, we're all playing for that 80th percentile shot. We're all playing for the perfect shot, and we just rarely hit it, which is why front hole locations are so difficult, even for players on the PGA Tour. But once we introduce a lake here, these guys aren't complete idiots. Some of them are pretty dumb, but they're not total idiots. Once we introduce a lake like we have here on number 9 at Colonial, they are capable of hitting the ball past the hole. This is what the shot pattern, these front hole locations, this is what the shot pattern should look like if this is rough, a bunker. It doesn't matter what it is. This is how they should be centering their shot patterns relative to the hole, on the green or slightly long, because I would rather be here. The only flip side alternative to never being here is by being here. Again, we have to shift the entire shot pattern shorter, and that's a bad idea, which is what's interesting is the PGA Tour is finally kind of figuring out that the hole locations that they put closest to the water actually typically play with the lowest scoring average on the green. So you'll hear the announcers like, oh, this is the difficult final round hole location. It's actually one of the easiest on the greens because it forces the players to play smart. If you start putting the pin away from the water, they kind of get confused. They don't know what the hell they're doing, and they wind up trying all kinds of stuff they shouldn't. Look at how tight these shot patterns are to the front hole location, and look at how crazy they are to the back hole location. It's the same hole. Perfectly honest, there is a ridge right here. There's why there's no golf balls. But I can assure you, these shots did not land at the top of the ridge and come all the way back. Maybe these guys did, maybe these ones did. But you can see the indecision, in my opinion, on this versus you do not see indecision in the target selection here. Absolutely critical because again, we just have a shotgun. Going to try to get through a few more slides before we turn it over to Q&A. This is on number 18 at PGA West where they play the Bob Hope, the American Express. I mean, the Bob Hope in 20 years. This shot pattern, you can see the lake is glass. This shot pattern is 110 yards wide this day with driver on the PGA Tour. And the vast majority of the reason why is because people get up here, they don't know exactly what they're doing, but they are thinking, don't go left. And whenever you have any iteration of the word don't in your head, that is a sign that you need to start over. You do not know exactly what you're doing because the biggest thing I need you to do is be committed to the shot you're about to hit. I need you to have an exact target. I need you to have an exact shape. And I need you to be fully committed. And the one thing I'll say while we're on this slide, with the driver specifically, you need to be hitting the exact same shape, the exact same trajectory every single time. The 9-box drill with irons, I still disagree with it, but I get it, whatever. But the driver is the only club in the bag that is specifically fit for a shape. I fade 100% of all my golf shots, but obviously I definitely do with the driver. When you go into a driver fitting, it's not like you're doing the 9-box drill, low cut, low draw. You're just not doing that. You're just hitting the same shot. So for me, my ball speed's 170-ish. I need a 14-degree launch and 2,200 RPM spin with my fade. So bam, we got that driver fit for that. If I go to try to draw that driver, my spin rate is going to drop a ton on average, and I'm going to hit knuckleballs. It's not going to go well. Same thing. The flip side of that is if your driver is fit for the same numbers but a draw, well, now when you try to cut it, it's going to be kind of a spinny flare. So with the driver specifically, and this is the best drivers, not named Rory McIlroy, the best drivers of all time, top 20 every single year on tour and strokes gained driving, hit the exact same shot and shape every single time. I do think Rory's a unicorn, but even with that being said, I do think he would be better if he stopped trying to work the driver as much as he does. But he's pretty darn good at it. And again, there are unicorns out there in the world. But I think it was that either the Tour Championship or the week before the Tour Championship, he hit, I didn't see it during the tournament because I don't really watch golf, but he hit some sort of a cut out into the lake, right, that I believe really impacted his chances of winning whichever tournament it is. So even him, it does jump up and bite him relatively often. The last thing I want to get to for you here real quick, before we go to Q&A, when you're in the trees, you're dead. On the PGA Tour, what this recovery number means is they're in the trees of some sort. ShotLink's got a way that it can kind of figure it out. They're actually using LiDAR now to even map all the tree branches to really get exact with these numbers. But if you think back to that strokes gained math, on average, once they are in the trees, where in a recovery situation, they average 3.8 strokes to hole out. They're basically making bogey 80% of the time from only 100 yards in the fairway. 100 yards in the tree. But remember that number that we talked about earlier, 2.8 shots to hole out from the fairway from 100 yards. It's the way strokes gain math works. If they're in the trees at 100 yards, and again, this isn't exactly perfect, but it's pretty damn close to be honest. If they chipped out sideways, anytime they have a tree branch or something in their way, chip it out sideways, they would be moving it from 3.8 to 2.8. They are moving it one stroke closer to the hole in one stroke. That would be a 0 strokes gain shot. Because again, once you're in the trees, I don't even care how far you are. You're just dead from 100 to 220 yards. So going 120 yards further back, it's only a 0.12 shot difference in the trees. Whereas in the fairway, it's over a half a shot difference, that 120 yards. Like once you're in the trees, you're dead. It is far more important for you to not make double from the trees than it is for you to make par from the trees. And again, I understand we all like trying the hero shots. We love trying to do that stuff. And if you're just having fun with your buddies, knock yourself out. But if you're a tournament player, you've got a junior golfer, you're taking your handicap serious, whatever it is, if you can't pull the shot off, you're considering 90+% of the time you need to pick a different shot. And if that means pitching it out, then just pitch it out and reassess. Even if it's a reachable par five, this is where people get themselves in troubles and make those Tiger five bogeys on par fives because they're like, it's a birdie hole, it's a reachable par five. I got to try something, get back in position to get a look at birdie. And it's like it was a birdie hole on the tee box. And I would argue it's not even a birdie hole, to be perfectly honest. But it was a easier hole when we were on the tee box. It is officially not anymore. It is officially now, how can I get back in position? And hey, maybe that means you got it to 100 yards in the fairway and we are ready to resume potentially trying to get looks at birdie. First and foremost, we want to be avoiding bogey. Actually, this is the last thing I'll talk about unless I find another slide. What we're looking at here is a shot pattern ellipse that I just have positioned over the front left hole location on this hole. We're coming in from the bottom is what I'm trying to imply here. This right here is indicative of a reasonable 9-iron from 145 yards. This is the hole that I focus on so much in the Decade app when actually teaching proper strategy. And what I need you to see is once I shift my shot pattern from the actual hole to the Decade target, it's just a Venn diagram. This yellow ellipse is the exact same size as the red ellipse. And you really have to trust, and it is a leap of faith, that the inside of your shot pattern, the Venn diagram shared portion of it, it's basically interchangeable. With this proper target, I'm essentially going to make the exact same amount of birdies. Yes, I'm going to have a slightly longer birdie putt on average, but I'm going to have more of them. So your birdie rates really don't change. So if you're coming down on the 18th hole and you're like, I got to make a birdie to get in a playoff, you don't change target. And again, really tough one to trust because what we've essentially done is traded these shots out on the left for these shots out on the right, which then when we back all the way up to how does your scoring average lower? Your scoring average lowers by making fewer bogeys than it does by making more birdies. And this right here is just, if you think of these Venn diagrams on tee shots, you think of these Venn diagrams on approach shots, think of these Venn diagrams in putting. If I've got a 20-foot putt, and again, Dave Pills, I really try not to give the guy a hard time. He did the best he could with the data that he had at the time. But first, he was optimizing for make rates. When he came up with his 17 inches past the hole as the optimal distance to hit a putt, he was, first of all, optimizing for make rates. But more importantly, he was saying 17 inches. Well, nobody can control their speed to the inch. Again, back on that day that I had Aaron Wise hitting those shots, I also had him hit 20-foot putts, and his shot pattern was 4 feet deep. So if you have a 4-foot deep shot pattern and I don't leave any short, well, then I've centered my shot pattern roughly 24 inches past the hole. I've centered my shot pattern even past the point of Pell's 17 inches. But more importantly, I'm also going to have 4-foot putts coming back, which, as I explained earlier, on tour is only 88%. I'm going to 3-putt and I'm actually not optimizing my make rates. By leaving literally 20+% of your putt short from a mere 20 feet, you will actually optimize make rates and optimize strokes to hole out rates by eliminating any silly 3-putts. And again, really tough one to understand. This is why, if you know my history, I've kind of gotten a few arguments with Brad Faxon over the years because he's just defiant about this idea. Brad Faxon left 1 out of 6 putts from 16 to 20 feet short in his 4 best putting seasons in the ShotLink era on the PGA Tour. All top 10 putting seasons relative to the tour rankings. Fantastic putting seasons. And he left 1 out of 6 putts short from 16 to 20 feet. So what you don't want to do is leave 2 or 3 20-foot putts short in a row and then get up on the next one and be like, well, I'm not leaving this one short, never up, never in, and gun it 5 feet by. Because now you've done everything wrong from start to finish. And I'll leave it there, John. You want to jump in with anything?
So if you made it this far, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something new. And if you want to learn more about Decade, you can check out the link in the description.